I'm just going to share my screen and bring up my first slide. Here we go. So it was nice to get the invitation to come and speak and be part of this event today. What I'm going to be talking about is what we dubbed the COVID-19 research cruise. We thought we were going to lose our whole field season, but then by filling in endless amounts of paperwork, we got permission from the University of British Columbia to go out. But for 30 days, we were locked up on this research boat, the Gikumi. And we had a lot of restrictions. We had to be isolated for 2 weeks before we went out and then maintain quarantine for 30 days. And believe it or not, we all came off smiling at the end of 30 days, despite the fact that many of us were double bunking to squeeze in and stay on board. Just to quickly introduce the research team, on the far left is John Turpin, who is the captain and owner of the Gikumi. Brianna Cairns next to him was a UBC technician and research assistant and now works for DFO. She was in charge of hydroacoustics. Dave, our cook, peering from the back, was a cook, a deckhand, a safety officer, and overall problem solver. Our chief scientist is the role that I was filling. Taryn Scarf is standing next to me. She had just finished her undergraduate degree and is now doing her master's on transients in the Salish Sea. And she was giving support for hydroacoustics, for drone operations, for photo ID, for social media, you name it. And I think all of us relied on her during the cruise. Keith Holmes is from the HANNAY Institute. He is our drone pilot. And Mike DeRoos, who many of you know from putting together skeletons, including the blue whale skeleton at UBC, was our tagger. Sarah Fortune, a research scientist, cetaceans in particular, and postdoctoral fellow, was in charge of the killer whale foraging behavioral components of the study. Chris Hall from Seaview Marine Sciences was captain of the Stellar Quest and core to our tagging team. So that's a quick introduction to who we were and the 9 of us. And here's another view. It's a very picturesque boat. We went out with one central question here, which was, is the availability of Chinook salmon insufficient to support a healthy southern resident killer whale population? And the study here is one component is the direct work we're doing here with killer whales. There's another team from UBC that's focused on Chinook salmon. They've been catching and tracking adult Chinook coming into the Salish Sea. There's another team that has been focused on the nutritional health or the nutritional quality of Chinook salmon. And we have another team of statisticians working with us as well. And so there's more than just the 9 of us. It's probably a total team 3 times this, plus the volunteers that are helping with us. The basic question we had here was wanting to see whether or not, as most people assume, there is a shortage of prey coming into Juan de Fuca Strait and the Salish Sea to support southern resident killer whales. And we know where many of the key important feeding areas are. But the trouble is that to do a comparative study, well, we don't really have the data to compare to the past to know what was here and how the animals might have been using and how easily they were having to find food. So what we did is to compare where another population, the northern residents, where they're also coming into areas where salmon are being funneled in as they're returning to their natal streams. And our goal here was to compare between the 2 areas to try to understand, is there some difference in the amounts of salmon during summer that's supporting the northern residents that are 4 times more abundant and appear to be much better than the southern residents. It's hard to believe how much equipment is needed for any sort of research trip. This is just a part of what we brought in addition to our own personal effects. But it was very tight quarters by the time we got everything here on board, including, of course, filling up with fuel and to run our skiff and to run a boat. Inside, here's the galley, which was a combination between a space to eat and prepare food, as well as to recharge batteries, download data, get down into the water. And so when we're actually looking for fish or surveying, it's put down here into the water. And then inside the wheelhouse is where Brianna was set up here. On the far right screen, looking at the tracks that we set to do line transects to estimate prey abundance in core important fish areas where killer whales are known to feed. And on the left-hand screen, you can get an idea of some of the sorts of data we're seeing on here. So we are able to identify Chinook salmon or Chinook-sized fish. And it's some technology that we've been developing under the guidance of Dr. May Sato for the past couple of years, doing validations of it. Here's from this past summer, the areas where we surveyed. Prior to going up, we held some workshops with some of the people involved with whale watching, some of the sport fishing guides, and asking basic questions. What do they feel is the best areas to fish, as well as the best areas where they see killer whales foraging. So there you can see with the blue lines, the transects we ran through what was considered to be important areas for Chinook. And in the green shows areas where we were following killer whales. And so we're able to survey areas, some before killer whales came to feed. In other cases, areas we went through after they've been through. But it was a combination of surveying for fish in the absence of killer whales as well as while whales were present. And here we've got one of the whales here that was we were following, although in this case, the whale has turned around and is now facing us. But we were surveying areas trying to basically map out the prey field to understand how and where whales were catching their food. The other component in here, whoops, I'm just going to come back, was to get fine scale movement data from the killer whales. And on here, we have a suction cup tag that's been put onto the side here of a whale. And this past summer, we had 10 encounters with northern residents, and we're able to put out 9 tags in that time period. Here, Sarah is pointing out some of the features on the tag to Mike and I. And the tag here contains an awful lot of instrumentation. It's got a high definition camera, it's got satellite telemetry, triaxial accelerometers, magnetometers, gyroscopes, hydrophone, and time depth recorder. But it's data that we have to recover to download. And also in here, it's got an antenna so we can use radio signals to locate the tag afterwards, as well as use some satellite signals as well. That was our vessel we're using for tagging, and you can get a sense of the length of the pole with the tag put onto the end of it. The other way we were looking at foraging behavior was using drones. And here you can see Keith launching it from Taryn's hands, one of our drones going up, as well as recording direct behavioral observational data as well, both from here, from the Gikumi, as well as from the skiff. The suction cups will release after a fixed period of time. Essentially, there's a corrodable link that lets air get underneath the cups, and they then come off and float. And the next thing is to recover it. And I have to say, looking for these tiny tags in the ocean is like looking for a needle in a haystack. It is remarkably challenging, although we were able to recover all of our tags. And one here being handed back by Chris. One of the nice things with this particular type of tag is that with a lot of data we collect, we can't look at it necessarily in real time, or we can, but you don't get that same sort of thrill. A lot of it has to be processed back in our offices and at our desks. But with the video, it became one of the highlights each day was to see what had the whales seen that day. And so we would often sit around and go through this footage, both the drone footage as well as the images caught on what we then dubbed the Orca cam. And I just want to share a few of the things we were seeing. This was the first animal we put the CATS tag onto. It was A100. And we were quite excited because we were expecting to see this and other whales we were tagging both interact with each other as well as capturing prey. And when we sat down, we thought at first, and looked at the first footage, we thought we were seeing the flash of salmon, but as we look more carefully, as you'll see here, this is what we were seeing on here on the side of A100. And as you're probably realizing, that's not a salmon. And it came as a total shock to us to realize that A100 has a flasher from fishing gear trailing along its side. We took some screenshots off the video and were able to determine it was sport fishing gear. We then tried to figure out where the hook was, and using from the drone, we had aerial images. We could measure then the length of the whale as well as look at the exact position. So here we can see the eye patches, the flasher, the tag, the saddle patch, and we're able then to work out how far it was and what the average length is that these flashers are put on to conclude that the hook was in the mouth. It hadn't gone into the throat or down into the stomach. But we never saw any sign that the whale was caught with fishing gear from the water. It was only from that underwater video. And later on, when we looked at the drone footage, we could then pick it up, but we would have missed it completely if we hadn't been looking for it. So this sort of thing may be going on a lot more commonly than we realize. We worked at a telegraph cove, and I know it's an area that's familiar probably to many people that are online. At least we worked in this general area. And one of the pods here that we encountered all three clans. And it was like a Grand Central Station with how many different pods were coming through here while we were present. And I'm going to show you, you can see one of the tags is there. You may just be able to pick it up. It was the C1 and D1 pods that came together. This is what we saw from the drone. And I'm just going to play a little bit of footage here from this pod here interacting as they were out separated feeding and then came together as sort of milling about and before they left again. And if you'd like to see what it looks like from the whale's perspective, you can probably see down here at the bottom, the tag. I'll show you what that whale was seeing about the same time this was taken. And so here we're now riding on the back. You probably notice how marked up the whales are as well as their skin condition. Again, things that are not apparent as we see them breaking the surface. Now with this particular pod, what we hadn't appreciated was that they weren't going to stay around. They were just passing through. When this tag came off, you can see up in the far left, 24 hours later, the pod had swum 140 kilometers. And in fact, they had started the day before down at the near Campbell River, had come up through. And for us on the Gikumi, it wasn't possible to go from Telegraph Cove and get up there. Unfortunately, we ended up hiring a water taxi to go out and look for this tag, and we had the Coast Guard on call should we need to get out and have their help as well. Unfortunately, we were able to recover that, and we did recover all the tags that we put out. So overall, with the Northern residents, it was really successful, and we've got a lot of data to go through, and we're processing both the video, the movement, and all the fish data as well. We then headed south. It was notable that there was a lot fewer vessels, particularly in absence of cruise ships on the water, and coming south to what we hoped would be frequent encounters. In the end, we only had 2 encounters with the southern residents, and we were able to put out 2 tags during that time. But unfortunately for us, as you may recall, this was about 10 in the morning, and you may recall what it looked like during that part of summer. Here was Vancouver. The smoke was so thick that we weren't able to really see the whales at all. And I'll show you here is one case here where the blue area here in the map is showing the areas where we were, and we were surveying for fish. And we got a report that there were southern resin killer whales. We could not find them in the thick smoke. Our eyes were burning, we were looking. And so while whales were present, it was unfortunate for us that the smoke had a huge effect on our ability to do it. So in the end, we were able to survey important feeding areas. And so we've got very solid data sets in terms of what prey were available in these areas. And we were seeing Chinook salmon in all areas. But we weren't able to get the same quality of information on behaviors that we got for the northern residents. So overall, we've traveled over 2,500 kilometers in our 30 days on the water. We surveyed over 500 kilometers of track lines to assess the accessibility or the availability of Chinook salmon, and recorded over 100 hours of video. For those that are interested, we've been putting up sort of an ongoing blog in terms of research. We put up research findings. We've got our website as well, where we do put also copies of our publications. So if you're curious to follow along, you might want to check out some of these sites. In conclusion, I just want to thank our funders and collaborators, and that includes DFO, the Pacific Salmon Foundation, the HANNAY Institute, Kintama, and NSERC. And I want to thank you as well for your attention. Look forward to taking questions. And I'm just going to conclude with one final piece of video to give you a sense of some of the things that we never quite appreciate that go on underwater between the surfacings that we see from our boats. And here you'll see a mum and her calf interacting underwater. We call this the belly rub video, as the calf is turns to have her belly rubbed. Anyway, a remarkable perception here, or view of what goes on underwater outside of our eyes. And I'll stop sharing, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, David. That was so beautiful to see, and what a great sense we got of the boat, and just a bit of a sense of what it's like to be on the boat. So I'm Noelle Bird. I'm a volunteer with SIMRES SeaTalks. And for our audience, I want to remind everybody to put your questions for Andrew into the Q&A for later. And we're going to move on now. It's my pleasure to introduce David HANNAY. David is the Chief Science Officer at JASCO Applied Sciences. We're looking forward to hearing about your ambitious project in Boundary Pass this year. And welcome, David.
Well, thank you very much. Just share my screen too. And share sound. Good. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'm really happy to be here today, and it sounds like there's a really quite a large audience of people watching today, which was lovely to hear. So my talk is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to focus more on sound and underwater sound than video and images. But this is a photo, by the way, looking out from the east point of Saturna Island into Boundary Pass. And what we see here together are a whale in the foreground, a humpback, and in the middle of the channel we see a ship passing by. This area is also used quite extensively by southern residents, especially for transiting through from Harrow Strait up into the Strait of Georgia. The issue of noise is really quite important. These animals behave much or use sound very much differently than we do. When you get a few meters or a few tens of meters below the surface, you start to lose the ability of having light available. So these animals are living largely in darkness, and that's especially true in the southern Salish Sea, where we have a lot of sediment content in the water. So these animals have become to rely largely on acoustics, on sound, for many of the types of things we use sight for. So that is why sound is so important for these animals. Killer whales are extremely sensitive to sound because they use sound not only for communicating with their other members of their pods, but they also use sound for echolocating to detect prey. So we've heard about the Chinook salmon shortage potentially for these animals, and that added to the inability to detect, to use echolocation as effectively if you're in a noisy environment. It simply exacerbates that problem. So I just wanted to get a little bit of information in about why we're so focused on the noise levels of the ocean. So Transport Canada, let's move forward. Transport Canada is the sponsor of this project. This is an underwater listening station, and it is. It also has Port of Vancouver's Enhancing Cetacean Habitat and Observation Program as a key collaborator. The station is located in the shipping lanes of Boundary Pass, and it's cabled to shore to a location on east point of Saturna Island, all of these hydrophone systems. I'll be talking about them a little bit as we go along. The project goals, the main project goals, are first of all to accurately measure the noise emissions of all of, or as many as possible, of the large ships that transit Boundary Pass. And we have thousands of ships per year do transit through this area. We also have the ability with these systems to detect and localize calling marine mammals. So that's an important goal, especially when this area has both a high density of southern resident killer whales and shipping. And we also have the ability to measure and track ocean noise levels over multiple years. Now, the project started in December 2018, and we used autonomous recorders. These are recorders that we drop to the seafloor and then we retrieve them later. And those recorded continuously from December 2018 right through to May of last year, when we deployed the cabled systems. And the cable, this picture on the left shows one of the cable frames, or the hydrophone frames. And I'll talk a little bit more about those on the next slides. One question might be, why was this location in Boundary Pass chosen? This was based mainly on a feasibility study led by Ocean Networks Canada that found this was an optimal location for several reasons. One is that this site is quite deep. The recorders are deployed in 190 meters water depth. And that's important because it's deep enough to make noise measurements of ships that conform with international standards for measuring sound levels. Also, this area has the inbound and outbound shipping lanes come together. They're adjacent. So we are able to monitor traffic going in both directions just from this one site. And also, as I said, Boundary Pass has a fairly high density of southern resident killer whales in the late summer and fall, early fall. So this lets us examine the interactions between whales and ships and potential changes in their behavior when they're near ships. The cables from the station run about 2.5 kilometers along the seabed back to a shore property on Cliffside Road. This is on east point of Saturna Island, and acoustic and oceanographic data from the stations are fed back to shore in real time as we measure them. And here they're on shore, they're processed in real time and stored immediately. All the results are stored immediately in a big database. And that database is accessible through a web interface, which is nice because you can get the results in real time. Now, the diagram at the top right here just shows how the system's deployed, with the 2 frames deployed out in the shipping lanes, and they're cabled with 2 separate cables back to shore to the station. The bottom picture shows the deployment on I think this is May 15th last year, when the cable lay vessel started from shore, past the cable to shore, and then it sailed out into the middle of the pass to deploy the frames. And this is a video of when the ship got out to the middle of the pass. Here it is deploying one of the frames. So it simply picked the frame off the deck. It was already connected to the cable, and it lowered each frame to the seabed. Now, as I said, we have 2 frames, and this this picture or diagram shows the 2 frames. They're located 300 meters apart. Now, each of these frames has 4 hydrophones on it, and what's really interesting about this is that each frame is able to not only detect sounds, but it can tell the direction that the sounds are coming from. With 2 frames, we're able to use those 2 directions to triangulate the actual positions of the sound sources, such as a ship or parts of a ship and or killer whales. And that ability lets us potentially track killer whales, for example, in 3 dimensions. So that also lets us count animals, because we can see the different animals moving in different locations as they swim past. And that's useful for counting animals in pods, for example. The ability to determine the direction of the noise is also useful because it will let us map the noise emissions on hulls. So map where noise is coming from on the hulls of ships, so we can understand what parts of ships are responsible for the noise. We're also getting a lot of other information from the system. In addition to those hydrophones, which provide the acoustic data, we are measuring water currents using an acoustic Doppler current meter. And that's this device in the left here. And basically this thing sends up pings in 4 directions, and it can use that information to map the water currents, both direction and velocity at different depths. And as Paul had pointed out, temperature and salinity measurements are important. We have a CTD, that's the device he talked about. And that's important for acoustics because salinity and temperature influence how sound propagates in the ocean. We also have video cameras on the system that are looking down at the seabed to capture near animals and fish that are very close to the seabed. And we track the vessel positions using AIS, which is a method that ships broadcast their position and speed information through VHF. And finally, we collect weather data from East Point Park weather station. And that's important because we're looking at ship effects, and we need to know what the sea state and what wind conditions they're working in. So all of these data are coming to shore in real time, and we are processing them using a very sophisticated computer system. This lets us get results in real time within minutes of actually measuring the sounds and currents and things like that. And that's important because it ensures the efficient use of all data. Often when you collect data, a lot of it ends up sitting on the shelf, but here we are actually processing it in real time and making these data available through a web application that managers and scientists can use directly to get that information very quickly. As I said, one of the key goals of the program is to make ship noise measurements. And the system to date has measured over 11,200 vessel passes, which is a very large number. And that's up to the end of January. We're also getting about 17 new measurements each day, and that's adding into our database. All of these measurements are compatible with measurements that the ECHO program made from 2015 to 2018. And together, this database is now about 18,200 vessels. It's the largest ship noise measurement database in the world, and it's continuing to grow as we operate this station. The system also is doing real-time marine mammal detections, and it does this automatically. We have detectors running in real time for humpback whales, killer whales, Pacific white-sided dolphin, and fish. Fish, we call them fish-like sounds because other sounds, bumps and things, can sound like fish. And as I said, the system has the capability to localize those calling animals, but we have not automated that yet. We are doing some of that in some research programs, but not automated. Now, the top right graph here shows marine mammal call detections versus time. And the left side of this graph goes from early June 2020, right up to 6th of January, so about a month ago or 3 weeks ago. And what you can see here is these green spikes in the middle are humpback calls from the summertime. There's a lot of humpback activity in Boundary Pass in the summer. And there's also some blue spikes, which are the killer whale calls. In the summertime, there were mainly big whales, so transient killer whales coming through, but the The southern residents did eventually show up. They were late this year, but in September and October, we had quite a few passes of southern residents, and you can see the larger spikes are when they lingered around the station for a while. And they actually stayed quite late this year. We had periodic southern resident calls right into December, and then quite a few transient calls in late December. Now, interestingly, we just the day before yesterday, there was some southern resident killer whale calls, and we think this is K-pod. And the bottom graph or bottom figure on the right shows a spectrogram. This shows the frequency and time of power of the calls that were received. This is just from Thursday, day before yesterday. I'm going to play that call quickly here so you can hear it. Yeah, so we're getting these, we were actually monitoring this as the whales were passing. Here's an example of a humpback, some humpback calls. And we had these, some humpbacks visited for about 3 days or 4 days in the end of November, early December. And they were calling, making beautiful calls for almost that full time. So I'll just play you an example of that too. Yeah, those are really, really nice to listen to. So the important question is how are these data being used, and how is the station being used? Well, for one, the measurements are being reviewed almost daily by the ECHO program managers, and one of the things they're doing is looking for unusually loud vessels. And when they do detect a loud vessel, they will they'll sometimes attempt to contact the owners, so the owners will know and be able to try to address the noise. And this can be things like a bent propeller causing noise, or bad bearings causing squeaky sounds coming out of the ships. So things that are not good for the ships, but also not good for the marine environment as well. And there are many studies and initiatives already in progress using the station's data. I'm going to just talk about a few of them here. The first is a ship noise correlation study. This is a study that has been underway for already a couple of years, but it's using data from the station to improve a ship noise model that predicts the noise levels of ships based on different parameters, such as their length, their speed, type of engines they have, type of propellers, whether also looking at things like noise mitigation systems to see if those are actually having much effect. So that's an important study, and you can go to the ECHO program's website to download reports that show the results of that study. You may be aware that there's been a voluntary ship slowdown trial going on for the last 3 years at least, and that continued into 2020, and I believe that's set to go again this coming summer. The data that are being acquired by the station are being processed to look at how much noise savings is coming from slowing those vessels. And in fact, last year we published a paper in the Journal of the Acoustical Society on the results of that work. And more work is actually going on to refine those results. A recent study is on ship noise localization on vessel hulls. So we're trying to map the noise emissions of along the hulls of vessels, as I said previously, to try to understand where the noise is coming from and what sources might be the best targets for trying to minimize the noise coming from them for noise mitigation strategies. There's a study been underway for a while now from DFO, and they were happened to be in Boundary Pass just yesterday doing playbacks of killer whale sounds. Now this study is led by Harold Yerk and Caitlin O'Neill at DFO is assisting. The goal of that work is to try to determine how far away southern residents can detect the calls from each other, and also how far away we can detect those calls. So we were monitoring the signals on the underwater listening station as they performed that experiment, and we were providing some feedback to them as they went. And this is really shows the power of why we want to have these real-time systems, so that we can interact with the experiments as they're going forward. An important study is one out of the Simon Fraser University, led by Ruth Joy, to try to develop artificial intelligence systems to to automatically detect killer whales, and also to try to filter out the southern residents and northern residents from the big whales, so that we can determine which pod is responsible for the sounds. And those systems work similarly to our automatic detectors, but these are hopefully improvements over time that can be added to the automatic detection systems. There's lots of ambient noise studies going on. We're measuring ambient noise over long time periods, and using these to compare with other sites and to look at what contributions the commercial shipping whale watch vessels, for example, are having to the ambient noise environment of the Boundary Pass. And one that I think is very important is a project to, it's called the Alignment of Ship Certification Notation project. And what we're trying to do here is to work with the ship certification societies to build in, to develop more consistent methods and thresholds or noise limits essentially for future build ships. And the goal here is to try to make these, make future ships have to pass a certification so that they are, they pay more attention to making sure they emit less noise. So the database that's being developed of ship noise here is being used to extract the noise levels of different classes of ships that can be used within that project. And a workshop was held in October with the certification societies for that, and it looks like everybody is very much on board. And that's another workshop will be held in 2021 to further that study along. So that I think is very important, because it has not only local consequences for reducing ship noise, but global. So this could potentially improve the acoustic habitat worldwide. And just I have a couple examples here. I think I have time just to quickly play some. This is more southern resident noise. And as I said, the system has video cameras on board. Each frame has a video camera and lights, and we make video recordings every hour for 3 minutes at the start of each hour. That camera catches lots of fish and benthic animals. We see always there's something happening in there. It's like having an aquarium in front of you. But on a few times now, we've had visits by this octopus. And this is a giant Pacific octopus who came into view there. And another time he came in and he came straight back and put it and wrapped around the camera for a moment before leaving. So it's really neat to see these things. Now we're getting more than an hour of data every day from this of these video clips, and we haven't had a good chance to go through them in detail. But our hope is to engage students, for example, from SEEK to help us with that, and that's something I really want to look forward to doing. Yeah. And so I just thank you everybody for listening. I'd like to acknowledge quite a few different organizations and companies who helped install this system. There's actually many more than this, but I wanted to get at least some acknowledgement to all these groups. So look forward to answering questions later. So thank you.
Thank you, David. What an important project. And we hope that it is going to help to create some good policy. So we're going to turn now to Norma Sarasogas and her team from the Coral Group, who've been working on Saturna and other sites in the Salish Sea for about 5 years now. And before we do that, I just want to mention that we have about 300 viewers today. So, and we're also going to be able to, Maureen's going to be posting a YouTube recording of this, so many more people will get to see this important work that you're all doing. So we're very excited to hear about what the Coral Group is doing and finding. And we're going to hear from one of their original team members, Norma. So I'll pass it on to you, Norma.
Thank you. Hopefully people can hear me okay. I'm going to start my watch too. And that you can see my share screen. I noticed there was some issues with some of the attendees seeing David's slides, but I was able to see them fine. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but hopefully people can follow my slides with no problem. And well, first of all, I would like to thank SIMRES for the opportunity to present our work here today, and to all of you. Great to see so many people signing up for this event. First, I guess I would like to talk about what our aim of the Photographic Observation Study is: to develop and use autonomous land-based systems and software to collect information on vessels' activities and marine mammals in key ecological areas within the Salish Sea, in order to fill data gaps on vessel traffic data, on marine mammal abundance and distributions, and to understand interactions between the two vessels and marine mammals. And this information will be, we think, will be very useful for underwater noise studies like the ones that Dave has been talking about. And it's a relatively inexpensive way to collect data for a long period of time. So we have several monitoring sites, some that unfortunately are not currently operating, like in Maine and San Juan Islands. Currently we have 3 though, two looking at Juan de Fuca Strait, one at Otter Point and another one at Sheringham Point. But today I'm going to be talking about, of course, the one on Saturna on East Point, which is being operating, it's our longest standing monitoring site and been collecting data almost continuously since 2017. So our system, we call them photobots, and they include several parts. The first one is it's a Canon SLR camera that you can buy at any store, really, nothing fancy. We also have a Raspberry Pi or microcomputer. We have an external hard drive for data storage. We also added a palm tilt zoom camera, which allows us to take images in low light. And we also, in the other 2 sites that I talked about before, we do include an AIS receiver to collect vessel information, just like the type that Dave was talking about before. But not at this location in particular, because SIMRES do have an AIS receiver, and we are using the data they're collecting at their site. It's at the same location. And this is the view from the camera. So in the background, you see Sketchak Island and then Waldron Island in the back. And the little map shows sort of the field of view of the camera approximately. So the images that we're taking are, they're actually bursts of 3 images, 5 seconds apart at the beginning of every minute. So this is an example where we start 1, 2, 3, so those 3 bursts, and then the beginning of next minute, we take another 3. And these cameras are allowing us to take information of all kinds of different vessels and different activities. This is just a sample and sort of zooming in into some of those, but from small, large boats, even kayaks. But even more exciting is that we get to see some marine wildlife, especially we're particularly interested in marine mammals, whales and sea lions, for example. When we found them on our images, we get really, really excited. So this is just a sample of the ones we've seen in the past few years. And we also get to observe both when marine mammals and vessels, and trying to see what is happening on those images. All these ones, for example, were collected in 2018. So I'm going to just show some of the data that I've been collecting so far using our cameras. This is just data collected during the summer months between June and September. I must say that all these images were actually manually analyzed. We didn't use any fancy software for this particular analysis. We have developed a tool to extract, to identify vessels on an image, but we were also interested in marine mammals, and our tool is not quite good enough for that. So we had to go through thousands and thousands and thousands of images. So the graph here shows unique vessels sighted for different vessel types during since 2017 all the way to just this past summer. And it's just very interesting to see the drop in the number of vessels, particularly small vessels such pleasure crafts and sailboats, and ecotourism boats like whale watching boats. Large vessel traffic such as cargo and tankers that haven't seemed to have a change or much of a drop in terms of numbers. Probably this is likely due to the effect of Covet and a decrease of the vessel traffic, particularly vessels coming from the US, which come visit the Canadian waters quite often. And even though we did have analyzed fewer images, so we're able to collect the fewer images, just 5% less than in 2017, still the drop is quite noticeable. Also, we're exploring, and this just happens after we implemented that monitoring site there on Saturna. We're looking at also the effects that the interim sanctuary zones have on the local vessel traffic, and the that were implemented by the government of Canada in 2019. And we're looking also compliance and the presence of boats in and outside and near that interim sanctuary zone. We also analyze images that had marine mammals in them. And this is just a plot showing the number of encounters for killer whales, harbor purposes, and humpback whales. Interesting to see a drop overall of marine mammal encounters in 2020, particularly a drop on the harbor porpoises. But then if we just look at the humpback whales, we did see a few more than in 2019 and a few more of killer whales. So we're just looking at these more closely now and see if we can understand what's going on there. Next, I would like to talk about the next system, a new system we have put in place just this last summer. We're really, really excited about this. And this is an infrared camera system, which is the camera itself is quite small, but then it's mounted on a large mount. And then we put it at the same location as the Photobot. And this was thanks to our collaboration with the Marine Animal Remote Sensing Group at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, led by Daniel Sirebart. And it also includes an infrared software, which is quite a really neat thing to have access to, so we don't have to manually analyze the video collected with the infrared camera. So how does it work? So this is just a video collected just on September 9th, 2020. And you'll see this is a pod of killer whales observed at that time. So infrared detection or thermal imagery utilizes the difference between the temperature of the animal's skin and breath and the surrounding water and air. So that's how you can see those detections. And the really neat advantage of using infrared is that it's independently of the lighting. So we can get data at nighttime, which we're not able with the other systems. Also, Dr. Sirebart and lab has developed a pattern recognition software, so a tool to detect well blows automatically while the video is being collected and running. So this has been quite successful at detecting large whales like humpbacks, and this is relatively new for smaller whales such as killer whales. So we see we're really happy to see that it's actually working. This just shows a couple of samples of the type of data that the system is collecting. One is from a killer whale fin that was detected just at the end of 2020, and a humpback blow, which just happened the day before yesterday. So could be one of those that Dave was talking about hearing on their recorders. So again, hopefully we can collaborate and using acoustic and imagery to better understand what's happening in our waters. So I'm going to show some of the very recent, very new data that we've just been collecting with the system. This graph shows the number of encounters between September and December observed in our infrared cameras. And we've been quite successful at detecting killer whales, total 43. Most of them seems towards the end of the year. Again, just note coinciding with those listening stations and data that Dave was, HANNAY was talking about. But we also seeing some humpback whales. So that's the other group that we're seeing quite a few. When we plotted at the, in terms of time of the day, we see that most of the encounters for killer whales happen in sort of late afternoon, while humpbacks late evening. But we see some right in the middle of the night, which again is interesting in filling that data gap, at least for us, where we were not able to observe it during those dark times. And when we see like how far away we're from the camera, we can detect them as far as 2,000 meters or 2 kilometers from the camera. And I just was worried about time, so didn't add more information. But what I do want to mention is that this project wouldn't happen with a good team good collaborating team from COTTRELL with master's students such Ben, and then a PhD student, Laura McWhinney, which was part of SIMRES just recently. It's still working on the project. But also our collaborators, especially Daniel and Sebastian's. Without their help, the infrared system would have been a success. But then, of course, Saturna for allowing us to have our systems operating at their location, as well as the Eagle Cove and the Lighthouse at Sheringham Point, where we have our other two systems. And of course, the funding from Transport Canada, DFO, Environment Canada, and the Oceanographic Engineering Society. And with that, I want to thank you all for your attention. Thank you again for SIMRES for inviting me to present our work. We have a website, postcanada.org, where I will be posting more information and will be updates more regularly now on the project. And my email, happy to, if you have questions about the project or interested in learning more, please don't hesitate to contact me. And with that, I'll finish my talk. So hopefully that got viewed okay. But
thanks, Norma. I think Maureen's going to jump in here, but I just want to say thank you for, it's so good to know that that you're watching and everybody's collaborating to know what's happening in our waters. It's really good to know. So Maureen, do you want to jump in?
Okay, hi everyone. I've been getting a few reports that some people are having trouble seeing the videos. If that's still happening, if you could please post that in chat. I'd just like to know whether you're on Zoom or on Facebook Live. You know, sometimes our technology is just doing funny things here, but if you're having problems, let me know. And if there's a lot of people having problems, we're going to stop and restart, which we hope we don't have to do. But anyways, for now, we'll just go ahead. And so I am going to be showing you, I'm going to do a screen share and show you Paul Cottrell's video. He lost his connection, so he's gone for the moment, but he hopes to be back for Q&A. So let me see if I can get there.
So maybe while Maureen's pulling that up, I'll just jump in and say that Paul is the Marine Mammal Coordinator for DFO. And he's our hero whale rescuer and a very busy guy. As Maureen was saying, he's right now up in Nootka Sound on the northwest side of Vancouver Island. He's working on an oil spill, which appeared in December, and it's from an old sunken ship. And he did pop in earlier today, but he was worried about his internet connection there. So he sent Maureen a video presentation that she's going to share, and then hopefully he can get back online later for the Q&A.
Sorry, gang, I'm having troubles with it. I can't seem to get it to work for you. So can we jump over to our next presenter, please? So that would be Susie and Sanjeev. Susie, are you there?
I'm
we'll
here.
try.
Yeah, we
Okay.
can.
I'll try and get back to Andrew's presentation. I don't know why it's not working. It was all teed to go. So, okay. So
Andrew,
Noel?
are you there?
Yes, I'm here, but I can't share the screen.
Yes,
the
please.
host has disabled
Oh,
screen
okay.
sharing.
Maureen, you have to get Sanjay to be able to share the screen.
So while you're doing that, I'm going to jump in and introduce you, Susie.
Sure.
And this is citizen science, which is something to not underestimate in its potential to help affect some change. And Susie and Sanjeev are going to share the Saturna Sighters Whale Project. So off to you, Susie.
Okay.
I still do not have permission to share my screen.
Maureen,
Sorry, technology issues here. I'm getting funny sort of responses here. But let's see, here we are. Okay, that should work.
Okay, perfect. Got it. Okay. Can you see that? Okay.
Great. Thank you, Sanjay. Welcome, everybody. I'm Susie Washington Smythe. I'm the coordinator of the Saturna Cetacean Sighting Network. We work with SIMRES, but we are a separate and distinct group. And so I want to give you a brief introduction on who we are, how we organized, how we reported our data, and most importantly, how reliable our data is. Sanjay, who you can see on the screen, at least I hope you can, has assisted us in analyzing our data. And as we move along, we'll discuss our findings. Saturna, as you can tell, has had a long-standing commitment to protecting marine mammals. So in 2020, a group of us formed a pilot project to monitor the abundance, frequency, distribution, and types of whales around East Point. We started from the premise that there is considerable local knowledge about the marine ecosystem that surrounds us. And by structuring a monitoring program, we could, over time, observe the social associations, traveling, and feeding strategies of cetaceans in the area. The catalyst for this program was the implementation of the interim sanctuary zones in 2019. Our community, while definitely supporting the protection of the southern residents, questioned the federal government's decisions about the size, location, duration, and enforcement of these zones. Moreover, we were particularly concerned about the lack of baseline data regarding the southern residents and other cetaceans at the eastern end of Boundary Pass. It's been really interesting to listen to what some of the other researchers have discovered this past year. Similarly, from the outset, we on Saturna, our low-tech approach we've been determined to collect robust and accurate data. We collaborated with the BC Cetacean Sighting Network, which has a well-articulated and interactive whale reporting platform on the web and in mobile phones. We adapted our program as needed and as we evolved to meet the challenges. We used a variety of social media tools to help us organize, become more informed, and to communicate. However, I want to emphasize that as interesting as social media is, and technology is interesting as well, it doesn't build a citizen science research program. It's the people and their dedication that do, and that's probably what makes citizen science unique. In addition to tracking whales, and because the interim sanctuary zones were created to reduce noise and physical disturbances for the southern residents, we who have eyes on the water and who live in the Salish Sea see the importance of compliance as well as enforcement as being critical to the success for protecting these animals. We took especially good care to document and secure reliable and verifiable data on 2020 vessel infractions, and there are significant discrepancies with the federal data that has relied on technology and remote observation. Our volunteer citizen scientists, I know, want me to emphasize this needs to be addressed before the 2021 season. Simply put, we believe if laws and ministerial orders are not complied with, they have no impact. So while boater education is key, boater warnings for repeat offenders and whale watching boats in the sanctuary zones don't work because there are no consequences. Compliance cannot be assured without enforcement. In this regard, we also want to highlight that while the ECHO program works during its time in force, whales are here year-round, and our evidence demonstrates there continues to be unfortunate whale and large shipping vessel interactions in Boundary Pass before and after the slowdown, the voluntary slowdown is in force. This too needs to be addressed in the very near future. You may be saying, well, that's all fine and dandy. How reliable is your data? Well, we took 6 main steps to ensure reliability. 1, we built in redundancy to see if our data reporting was consistent in the group. 2, we individually trained all our sighters, there are 13 of us on Saturna, on how to use the BC Cetacean Sighting Network's program to help us ensure consistency of how we report the data, apples to apples, if you will. We compared our data with the next presenter, Lucy Quayle, to assure our accuracy. At least I think Lucy's going to be next. And we took photos and used rangefinders to establish whale IDs when possible and to document vessel violations in the interim sanctuary zone. Finally, we also developed a collaborative working relationship with DFO Compliance and Enforcement and Parks Canada Warden Service to help us map the ISZ and to develop a protocol for documenting vessel infractions. Finally, we consulted with Ruth Joy, who from SFU, that many of you know, and sought help from Sanji, a scientist skilled in data management, to interpret our findings. And so this is probably a good time for me to turn this over to Sanji so that we can tell you what we saw. Thank you.
Thank you, Susie. I think I'm going to have a challenge. So this is just the map showing some of the sightings around the Saturna Island that was done from April 2020 right up to December 2020. And one of the key challenge we had was the GPS location of the sighting being has improved. Initially, people were putting pin drops of where they were, but they were supposed to put it at where the whales were located. Once that was improved, we then went on to looking at the data from this. Sorry, give me a second. I'm having problem with my microphone. So we had about 270 days in which the data was collected, of which 157 days were active sightings from the 13 observers that Susie had just mentioned. of the sightings done, there was almost 60% individual sightings of humpback and a few 18% of the transient, and then a few of the resident as well as the porpoises. Looking at to build in the redundancy that was just mentioned, there were two strategies that were adopted. One was photo IDs. The second was creating a 90 minutes window between two observations for the same species on the same day. And what was noticed from the photo IDs were there were 255 unique whales that was identified. And 179 whales were only seen once. The rest of them were seen multiple times. And thanks to Lucy for doing all the photo identification. So in addition to that, because we're looking at the citizen data, the certainty with which the citizens could identify was the species was almost 85%. And the counting of the whales was about a 75% accuracy, because there were a range of animals that were present as they were traveling. So there was a few, it's not 100% accuracy on that reporting. In the exclusion zone, the time frame, the table in the center here gives an idea of the number of sightings we had. As the data was reported, there were 540 sightings. But in a 90-minute variation, we saw that there were 367 sightings, of which we had 1,300 cetaceans overall that were observed, of which, looking at the observations, there were almost 30% each of the humpback, southern residents, and the transient that was seen. Just at this point, I want to make a note here that we are using the term sightings for events that were recorded on the BCCSN website or the app portal. And on the word observation is for the number of actual whales that were seen. The next stage, once we were able to establish a protocol of the recording of the data to see was if there was any correlation to the tides and the sightings of the mammals. And what we noticed was, if on the table here, majority of the sightings took place during the low tides. There's 190 sightings, and very few were seen at the high tides. And in terms of the reporting that was done, this is a table, a graph here, which shows the number of sightings that were recorded over a day, 24-hour cycle, and majority of the time recording was done from 10 a.m. right up to about 6 p.m. Unfortunately, we do not have data from 11 at night until 6 in the morning. We are hoping that hopefully in the future we can collaborate with NORMA and get the data for the IR measurements with the chip. What was also noticed was in creating a correlation between the tide time and the movement and the sightings, that there was a lot more observation taking place just during the slack tides. So the blue arrow here indicates the time of the tide, and the graphs on this side, the bars here indicate how many minutes after the tide was the sighting actually seen. So majority of it is happening quite just within half an hour or so after the tide has gone through. So once we were able to establish what was going on with respect to the tide, the next focus was to look at the traveling direction of the cetaceans. And what we see is that there is a maximum traveling in the east direction with about 285 actual whales traveling in that direction, followed by the southwest, And then there is the southeast and the west direction in which the traveling took place. And in terms of the 6-hour cycle of a day, majority of the traveling in the east direction was taking place in the afternoon from 12 to 6 p.m. So this yellow line here indicating the traveling in the east direction. And in the southwest and the west direction, there was an equal movement taking place throughout the daylight. In terms of the types of cetaceans that were moving through, there was the humpbacks were mainly seen traveling in the easterly direction, and a lot more of their residents were also seen in the easterly direction, while the the southern residents were seen in the southwest direction predominantly. So that gives an idea of what was happening with the traveling of the whales. There was more data analysis that was done, but for now we just presented a simple idea of what's happening with the movement of the whales. And, oops, sorry. Then the last and the surprising slide that we have is the observation per week of all the whales that were seen. So what we have here is on a weekly basis of what was recorded. The green line indicates the humpbacks that were seen for almost the whole of April, May to July, a bit of less activity in July, August. Data, they were there in March, and almost every month they were visible, except a minor dip in the sorry? Can you all hear me? Okay, so the transient were not visible in just a brief period in June. Otherwise, they are available throughout the year. As far as the southern...
Oh dear.
They were quite fortunate that two days ago, we actually spotted more southern residents in the area. So it means that most likely they're traveling from July all the way back into April as well. There's a brief moment from May to June when they are not visible or we couldn't identify. Now, is it because there were more humpbacks that were present during that time, or was it something else happening? I think other researchers would be able to shed more light on that.
Sanji, you're
Look
cutting
at the corollary of the exclusion principle. Hello?
You were cutting out.
Sorry. So we used the corollary of the exclusion principle of the 90 minutes of data to show that as much as two events, we used a 90 minutes time lapse, it also implied that during that period, the whales were present in the water, in the area of observable area. So we see that within a 90-minute zone, there are 107 southern residents that were still present during the water during this period of time. If we even look at a period of 3 hours, there are about 130 that are present during that period of time. So this just shows that the exclusion time also works in its corollary to indicate that the southern residents are constantly present. Now, hand over back to Susie.
Thank you. Well, the key findings, I think, from our sort of visual observations, which interestingly enough are supported by both what Norma and David mentioned, is that the abundance of and frequency which all cetaceans use the waters around East Point is significant, and in particular, the southern residents. Next slide, please. Cetaceans use all the areas in and adjacent to the sanctuary zone, not just June to November. And I noticed that both David and Sanjeev mentioned, as well as you, Norma, that we heard Southern residents 2 days ago, and they were the advantage of having eyes on the water is you can identify them, and it turned out it was the J-pod, not K-pod, as we all had originally thought. So it's clearly that they use the ISZ, not just during the time that it is in force. The Southern residents use the sanctuary zones to feed as well as transit. And I think Sanjeev showed in our research the, am I over time? Somehow the last slide got taken down. Interestingly enough, because we built in redundancy, we also were able to establish duration of time that cetaceans are in the area. And the final slide that I want to say is that compliance and enforcement, and I don't know what happened to Sanjeev, he's completely gone with our slides. So I'm going back to the low tech, is that it is a problem in the sanctuary zones. And sorry that you can't see the slide, maybe we will later. I guess in terms of our next steps, we will continue to provide verifiable data about cetaceans, especially the Southern residents. We certainly want to have be able to work with other researchers who are working specifically in this area. It was encouraging to see the synergy that we have in terms of documenting when the various cetaceans are in the area. We would hope to analyze the SIMRES hydrophone data over the next year, especially for the lack of data between 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. It was interesting to note that Norma said that most of the Southern residents were seen during the day. It was very convenient for us, but we do want to see who else is out there at night. One of the really exciting things that we're doing this year is we are expanding the sighting network to Pender, and I'm happy to report that this past week, Pender sighters are up and running, and we were able to track the whales from Pender to Saturna just this past week. And I guess finally, we will continue advocacy to improve compliance in the sanctuary zones. We who live above the sanctuary zones think that compliance will only work when there's enforcement. And we certainly hope that the government will consider expanding the duration of the sanctuary zones up. Here we go. This is my thank you. We hope that the federal government will consider extending the duration of the sanctuary zones because the Southern residents, I think, are documented to use it all year round. And certainly the shipping zone, while the ECHO program is successful while it's in force, it probably needs to be expanded. So I guess, and thank you for letting us share what we've done, our low-tech approach. But I hope this presentation leaves you thinking a little differently about what citizen science can do and what perhaps we can do when we work together and think about what are the barriers that get in the way. So with that, thank you very much for letting us participate.
And sorry, I got cut off halfway.
I would like you, if possible, if we still have time, to show you our enforcement slide, because I think that's pretty significant. Back. No. One more.
No.
I don't know why it's going anyway. Here we go. That was it. Oh, well, never mind. It's okay. We will be posting all our findings and our visuals on the SIMRES website soon. So if you missed the slides, particularly about enforcement, we will be able to, you will be able to see it on the SIMRES website. So thank you very much.
That's great. Susie and Sanjeev, thank you so much. I think we definitely got how, the importance of this citizen science work is and how much it plays a part in the collaborative research that's happening. Thank you so much for sharing that. And as Susie said, everything's going to be on the, I think Maureen will get everything on the YouTube site, or on the SIMRES site for everybody if anything got missed. So we're going to turn now to Lucy Quayle. And I believe after Lucy, Maureen will share Paul Cottrell's presentation. So Lucy is a master's student from SFU, and she spent, I believe, all last summer on Saturna collecting data for her project. So welcome back, Lucy, via the internet, and I'll pass it over to you.
Alrighty, can everyone see my slides and hear me okay? All right, so thanks for that introduction, Noelle, and thanks for having me back again. So I'm going to dive into a bit of an intro into the location of my study. So Boundary Pass is an important region as it's where the Fraser River meets the more oceanic Harrow Strait. So this mixing of the water causes natural upwelling of nutrients and supports much marine life, including whales and other marine mammals. So this area is also included within the southern resident killer whale critical habitat due to its historical importance to the endangered population. Unfortunately, Boundary Pass is also a very busy area for recreational ecotourism and commercial vessels due to its both its beautiful location as well as the proximity to the US-Canada border and commercial shipping lane. So noise pollution, vessel disturbance, and ship strike have all been listed as threats to whale species. And some of the impacts include increase in transit time, disruption in navigation, communication, and foraging, as well as, of course, injury or fatality. So we all know that 2020 was a bit of a different year for all of us, and it's likely no different in the underwater world. Some big changes that occurred in the area include an overall reduction in tourism, as well as that complete ban on cruise ships, which has just been extended for another year. The Canadian whale watching season was delayed in starting and had fewer boats on the water, while the US ecotourism and recreational vessels were completely unable to enter Canadian waters due to that border closure. With all of this, we also had in place the seasonal commercial vessel slowdown run by the ECHO program, as well as that interim sanctuary zone near Saturna Island that Susie was talking about. So with all these changes, there was likely an effect on the underwater soundscape. For my research, to begin with, I first wanted to know how the whales were using Boundary Pass, both spatially and temporally. I wanted to know how often vessels were around whales, as well as how often whales overlapped with the shipping lanes, as well as the interim sanctuary zone. And through answering these questions, I hope to be able to increase the ability to identify periods of time during the summer that have higher risk of vessel-whale interactions in the area. Finally, I want to investigate if the impacts from COVID, the commercial vessel slowdown, and the no-go zones led to a detectable reduction in noise in Boundary Pass. But unfortunately, I won't be talking about this today, but stay tuned in the future. So to begin to answer these questions, I chose my field site at East Point on Saturna Island to have a good vantage point to study both the shipping lanes and the interim sanctuary zone. So I conducted visual scans every 15 minutes for a period of 7.5 hours using a camera with a telephoto lens, binoculars, and a laser rangefinder to both detect and collect information on whales. During this time, I was also listening constantly, or at least above water, as I learned early on that whales are often heard before they are seen due to their large exhales and their splashy nature. When I detected the whales, I collected information on event duration, location and direction of travel, proximity to vessels, and their behavior state. So I guess that's one of the benefits of doing visual observation over some of the other methods that we've heard about today. So to summarize my summer in just a few numbers, in total, I completed 106 surveys with the help of my trusty volunteer, reaching over 839 hours of observation effort. Whales were observed on 53 of the 106 survey days, with 114 whale sightings recorded. Breaking this down into humpback, transient, and resident events, I standardized my sightings by scaling the number of events by the number of hours of observations per week. So just to give you a bit of understanding of what this means, the 0.2 on the vertical axis is equal to 1 sighting every 5 hours of observation time for that week. So the obvious thing here that I see is that the sightings do vary per species as well as over time. You can also see that the humpback numbers increase, well, there's a peak in June, and these higher numbers are mostly attributed to the presence of Heather and her calf, who spent over 6 weeks constantly around Saturna Island last year. And speaking for myself and likely most of the people of Saturna, I am particularly excited to see if either of these 2 individuals return this year. And there is a high chance of this, as humpbacks often return from their winter migration to the same places year after year. So for the transients, they were most often observed in August and September. So this lined up roughly with the end of the pupping season of the harbour seal population, which was located on Boiling Reef. So this was just off East Point inside my field site. Foraging behavior in this area was observed in at least 1/3 of all transient events, and at least half of these were likely successful. And of course, the southern residents were mostly undetected in this area in Boundary Pass throughout the time. So they were only detected on 3 occasions in my study. However, they were detected on a number of other occasions during the study period, either by Saturna sighters or through the hydrophone detections. Here, so I've included some data collected by Nicole LeBaron from 2019. And again, it has that same vertical axis of weekly sightings per unit effort. So her study included 122 days of survey on Saturna Island between the same period of time, but the year before. So the first thing you can see is there isn't that high peak of humpbacks in June, though humpbacks were still detected during that month. And then the transients, they were observed in similar numbers to 2020, though perhaps more sightings earlier in the summer in 2019. And again, the southern residents were only observed a handful of times in both years. So just taking a bit of a step back and looking at what these species are doing in the whole of the Salish Sea. So we have seen that over the last few decades, both the humpbacks and the transient whales have been returning to the Salish Sea in high numbers and staying for longer. It's important to keep in mind that there has likely been an increase in observer effort over that period due to increase in ecotourism and recreational boat traffic, as well as a general awareness of whale reporting networks. To put it plainly, with more observers, you'll likely see more whales. But for humpbacks, though, it is thought that the populations are currently recovering after their numbers were decimated by the whaling industry, and their expansion back to the Salish Sea has been dubbed as the Humpback Comeback. For the transients, the increased number of sightings is likely linked to a number of factors, including the doubling of their population since 1990. There's been an increase in their prey species, the harbour seal, as well as more matriline family groups expanding into the area. So it's not currently known how these distribution changes will affect the underwater ecosystem. So all the projects like that we've heard from today will likely help to build that bigger picture of just how the Salish Sea may be impacted in the future. So as many of us already know, the seasonal distribution of the southern resident killer whales has also been changing over the last decade. For example, 2020 was the first year on record that this population was not detected in the Salish Sea during the month of August. And instead, during this time, they were reported southwest of Vancouver Island near Swiftsure Bank. So there are a number of likely reasons why the movement patterns have changed over the years. Food availability is likely a large factor, as their main prey species, the Chinook, have been recorded in low densities in the Salish Sea in previous years, and many populations are considered threatened or endangered. And another big change that has affected the resident population recently is that the matriarch, known as Granny, died in late 2016. It was estimated that she may have been over 100 years old at the time, and a theory is that perhaps the change of leadership may have influenced the population's distribution and behaviors since her passing. But as previously mentioned, the waters of the Salish Sea are busy with vessels, which increase the risk of vessel disturbance, noise pollution, and those ship strike. So along with all of the other factors, perhaps the waters of the Salish Sea are just not as suitable as they once were. So stepping back into my study, my effort was focused on the shipping lanes and close to the Saturna shoreline, though when whales were observed further out, they were still recorded. I found that 74% of the events included whale travel inside the shipping lanes, and that whales went through the interim sanctuary zone, or at least the northern section that I was looking at, in 45% of events. So this map gives you a bit of a snapshot of the number of whales observed in these locations, though it doesn't really show the full extent of their travel through the area. There was also likely a decrease in efficiency of sightings the further away from my vantage point or in inclement weather, though it was a bit easier with collaborations with citizen science organizations such as the Saturna Cetacean Sighting Network, and of course the presence of ecotourism vessels also helped to improve the accuracy of detections. So keeping in mind, looks like one of my pictures aren't showing up, but that's okay. Keeping in mind the high whale overlap with the shipping lane and the number of vessels found to travel in interim sanctuary zone, as Susie mentioned, vessels were observed near whales in 65% of all whale events. This included 33 whale events with commercial vessels nearby and 58 whale events with small vessels nearby. Interestingly, I did find that in over 20 whale events, there were small vessels that drove right by whales, seemingly unaware of their presence. Whales, in particular humpbacks, can be very cryptic, and they can pop up unexpectedly, resulting in a higher risk of ship strike, especially in such a high traffic area. Ship strike can cause harm or fatality to the whales, as well as it can injure the boaters as well. So 2020 was likely a very different year in terms of the number and types of vessels that were seen around the whales and in the pass in general, and this was shown in one of the previous talks. With new whale watching regulations and the general reduction in tourism, noise levels were likely reduced in the area. However, much more research needs to be done to confirm the impact of this. This is an active area of research, and through using data from the SIMRES hydrophone and specifically looking at the effects of COVID, interim sanctuary zone, and the slowdown on noise levels, we hope to get a better understanding of the conditions in this dynamic location. From what I personally observed in Boundary Pass, is not only an important transit route for whales, but can be important habitat for humpback whale mother-calf pairs, as well as transient killer whale foraging. And although that the residents were only observed a few times between June and October in 2020, and similarly in 2019 in Boundary Pass, it is unknown how southern residents will use this area in the future, and the historical significance of the area should not be overlooked. Continued monitoring in the years to come by the Saturna Cetacean Sighting Network, as well as collaborations between future students and SIMRES and all the other great projects that are going on around the place, will enable us to get a better idea of what's going on in the area and detect any of those trends. And with that, I'd like to thank the many people who have helped me along the way with this project. And I'll pass it back to you, Noelle.
Thanks, Lucy. It's really great to hear your research and to hear how you're collaborating with us here on Saturna. And we hope you'll come back again as soon as you can. And now Maureen is going to share Paul COTTRELL's work and the video presentation that he's prepared. So over to you, Maureen.
Thank you.
I'm Paul COTTRELL. I'm the Marine Mammal Coordinator for DFO, and I work on the BC Marine Mammal Response Network and also the Whale Tracking Network. Today I'm going to talk about the kind of the history of the Whale Tracking Network and first start off with kind of the BC Marine Mammal Response highlights. And as part of the Whale Tracking Network, speak of all the collaborations that I've had over the years to get where we're at, including all the stations and the work that goes into building those. And also the collaboration that we've had with Google around artificial intelligence algorithms to detect. A big thank you to SIMRES for inviting me to the SeaTalks to do a presentation.
Sorry, everyone. I've had to restart it, but I'll just try forward it again and get it running again. Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, I'm gonna try again. I don't know why we're having trouble with this, but some people couldn't hear it, so we'll...
Gear checkmate, which we were able to use a drone to identify the gear. This drone footage. We use drones now extensively to approach animals and get these gear configuration pictures. Previously, we'd have to approach the animal in a vessel, which was quite dangerous. So X-ray was another animal that this year that we had, which was entangled. An interesting entanglement in that it had gear through its mouth and a significant amount of trailing gear. And this animal had a companion animal, so it was quite a difficult disentanglement effort. We were able to put a working line on the animal, and this is a drone shot of the animal trailing gear. And we worked for a significant amount of time on this animal, and you can see it was a nasty entanglement. We were able to remove a lot of the trailing gear, but it was only a partial disentanglement. This is the attachment of the satellite tag buoy. You can see it's a real coordinated effort with the driver, quickly come in, get the satellite tag on, and then move away. I just wanted to quickly mention a sea lion rescue that we did collaboration with the Vancouver Aquarium, Marty Helena and Lindsay Akers, who are amazing, their whole team. And we were able to dart this animal that had a significant neck wrap, a stellar sea lion. And you can see that's removal of gear and the animal's off free on its own. The BC, the Vancouver Aquarium and the Rehab Center is just a big piece of the BC Marine Mammal Response Network. This year we had a gray whale at UME, a continuation from last year. We had 11 dead animals in 2019 and 5 this year, and we were able to do necropsies or sample all 5. Range wide within the gray whale UME, we've had 214 in 2019. This is and then in 174 in 2020. This is a time lapse of humpback necropsy, and just wanted to showcase Dr. Stephen Raverty, who really is, he leads all our large whale necropsies, the amazing job he does. Next, I'm going to talk about the whale tracking network that we have in the collaboration with Google. And that's Matt Harvey, the AI engineer that worked on the project with us. So the whale tracking network consists of 15 real-time hydrophone stations, which are situated in key areas within southern British Columbia. And the primary purpose is to minimize certain risks to cetaceans. And those risks include minimizing vessel strike risk, reducing oil spill exposure risk, locating animals if there's health or injury issues where we need to monitor. It also helps researchers locate southern resident killer whales for research purposes. Also for ISEDs for enforcement folks. And also we do record all of the stations 24/7. So we have those acoustic levels and background levels that may be useful for looking at ambient levels of noise and when those noise levels change with vessel traffic, especially when southern resident killer whales are present, which of course it's very important to ensure that they're not undergoing too much vessel noise over time. So the killer whale tracking network has been a long time in the making from 2011 to present, and Innovation Canada has been a big piece of that, which really started this along with Ocean Sonics and Lido, Listen into the Deep, which was initial focus to look at what may be possible and develop these hydrophone stations. The station designs, all these hydrophone stations are cabled. The hydrophones are all 60 to 100 feet deep and cabled to shore. The hydrophone stations are in various certain manned lighthouses, reef lighthouse stations, BC ferries terminals, CRD docks, and private residences. They're also solar powered stations or stations that have direct power. So it's quite a variable, different number of types of stations, which depending on the situation, all the hydrophone data is either beamed by radio or through the internet to servers at Saturna Island and Steveston. And that's the real-time streaming interactive web interface, which also allows the Google AI program to then look at that data real-time to auto-detect killer whales or humpbacks. And now for a demonstration of the whale tracking network real-time. As you can see by this page, there's tremendous number of collaborators that have made this possible, and it's taken years to get to where we are. So just logging into the web interface, looking at the real-time network. On the top here, we have vessel traffic, and on the bottom, we have icons of all the hydrophone stations that we have in southern British Columbia. And we're up to 15 stations and 20 hydrophones. So if we're zooming in on the Gulf Islands, which was kind of the key in the initial thrust of this project to look at active past, but just going to Saturna Island, East Point, we've got a hydrophone that's a collaboration with SIMRES, initially with Larry Peck and Maureen Welton, and now with SIMRES and Martin Whale, and of course, Dave Osborne. So clicking on East Point, you can listen live, see what we have. Nice and quiet and boundary pass in East Point, that's good. And this, of course, is in the ISED there, so it's good to know when we have vessels present in there, and also when we have whales, so we can allow get our enforcement guys in there if we need to. So looking at Boundary Pass, again, we have Tilley Point, which is off South Pender. That is a collaboration with Sally Richardson and Dan Kranzler and the Kieran Foundation. And this is the hydrophone that we've had in the water the longest time. It's been 11 years and really was the start. And if you go further north here in Oak Bluffs, we have a hydrophone, which is a collaboration with Chris Roper, which is in the Pender ISED. And if we click on that, let's see what we have. Nice and quiet. So this is a live recording of what we have. All quiet in Pender Bluffs ISED. So moving north here to Mowat Point, which is another collaboration on Pender Island. And this is a collaboration with Alan Lowe and Barry Potvin. And we've had this hydrophone in for a number of years, and another really important hydrophone location, because as we can get whales moving away from active pass or into active pass. The next hydrophone moving east is Enterprise Reef, and this is a very small reef where we have this hydrophone that also picks up animals when they're leaving active pass or entering. We have a hydrophone in Miners Bay and also in Sturdy's Bay. And these hydrophones all beam to the main island radar tower. And we're really the start of the network, because this is really a critical, narrow waterway where we don't want to have vessel traffic and whales in there at the same time because of vessel strike risk. So moving over to Tsawwassen, and BC Ferries has been a great collaborator on this project with 5 different terminals and hydrophones. And I want to single out Leslie James has been just a great collaborator and help on this project to make that happen, and using the infrastructures for security and has been really important. Moving north up to Sandheads, this is a lighthouse station 10 kilometers off the Fraser. And this hydrophone deployment is a collaboration with Fraser River Pile and Drive. They do the dumping and dredging, and of course they don't want to be dumping or dredging when there's killer whales around. So part of the requirement for the mitigation is that they listen to this hydrophone before they actually do any work to make sure there's no killer whales present. So this, we also have Annacis Island and Steveston, where we have our servers that they beam the information live to, either through the internet or through our wireless networks. So moving over to Sheringham, it's a lighthouse. This is a key collaboration with the Sheringham Lighthouse Society, and they've been fantastic. And we've had this hydrophone in for a number of years. And let's just listen here to see what we have. And it's quite often this time has humpbacks or calls. All quiet, all quiet. There's maybe some faint calls there. Well, we're going to go through the tabs on the top and the real-time alerts. But moving up to Nootka Island, we put a hydrophone station in on Thursday, and this is our newest station, which is really important for identifying the stations that are moving into Nootka Sound. Currently, there's a little bit of an oil discharge happening in Zuccardi Channel, so important we know what animals are going in out. Let's have a listen there. Well, I can see from the spectrogram we actually have some calls here. Let's have a listen. And this is not scripted. Let's see, this is a really key. This is off UQuad, the Nootka Light Station. Looks like there's a call here. There we go. Sounds like killer whales. And we've had humpbacks and killer whales multiple times per day. So just in the last day. So this is incredible. And this is not staged. And we'll be sending the calls to Dr. Ford for verification. And let's go back to the other stations, just get through this. So moving up to Comox, another key station in Northern Salish Sea. We've had JPod for most of January up in this area, and this hydrophone has been picking them up frequently, and that's again a collaboration with BC Ferries. So this, that gives you an idea of just the sheer number of stations we have, and they're all real time, and just the value and even having to be able to follow these animals. Looking at the top tabs, and we also have alerts, both humpback and killer whale alerts, and that's part of the Google AI algorithm, where there's thousands of hours of recordings that have been used by the engineers, the Google engineers, and also annotated calls, killer whale calls and humpback calls, to develop this AI algorithm. And I'm going to go through that in more detail. We also have archive files. So we do our best to archive 24/7 all of the acoustic recordings, and we can go back and find different days or months of different sites and record. And of course, important to be able to do that for research purposes, and for also confirming the auto detection algorithms to see where they've missed. And that built into that is we can all look at what we can reject or accept the Google AI algorithm. The Google AI collaboration actually happened by chance. I was at an acoustic workshop at the University of Victoria that was put on by Ocean Networks Canada, and Matt Harvey and his Google AI team happened to be there at that workshop. They had done a prior project with NOAA on humpback whales and acoustic detection, and they take on one conservation project every few years to focus on. And this was, in the end, after talking with them, our project fit with these streaming hydrophones to be able to fit in with their acoustic expertise and artificial intelligence programming. So it worked out so well, and we worked together and were able to provide thousands of hours of recordings and annotated calls to the Google AI team, and they were able to put together this program, which we've been able to integrate into this web interface. And I think the huge benefit of the auto detection algorithm is its ability to continually monitor 20 hydrophone streams, which, if was done by a human, would take multiple humans and lots of effort. The Wall Street Journal covered our collaboration with Google a lot better than I just did, so I do welcome you to please go check out the podcast that Wall Street Journal put together. The acoustic, this is an example of one of the acoustic detections from Thursday in Boundary Pass, when we had J-Pod throughout, both in the morning and then in the evening. And these calls are very, very loud, very vocal, and were confirmed by Dr. Ford to be J-Pod. And coming up is actually echolocation clicks, which was quite neat to hear, and seeing that these animals are foraging quite close to where the hydrophone stations are. And one key part of our network is Annacis Island, where we have our whale operations center. And this is the key place where the streams come to, and we have a server, and we also have the monitors that show the stations and the acoustic spectrograms, and also have the audio of the different stations. Next steps for the whale tracking network in Google include looking at gaps that we have in hydrophone coverage. The purple pins indicate areas where we're looking to put additional hydrophones for monitoring killer whales and humpbacks, both in the northern Salish Sea and along the west coast of Vancouver Island. Also, in terms of working with the Google AI team, we're looking at incorporating killer whale ecotype, and eventually to killer whale pod level, and annotating those calls so that the program can learn learn and be able to identify those. So those are all things that we're looking to in the future. A big thank you to the organizer of the SeaTalks, and I look forward to any questions at the end of the speakers.
What an interesting project, hey? And what is so good and heartwarming to hear that Google AI is doing something so positive. And to hear all the collaborative work that's going on in so many different ways. It's very heartwarming. I had no idea there were that many hydrophones all around us in this part of the world. So hopefully Paul can connect with us later. And now it's time for our Q&A. And we have Dr. Ruth Joy, a statistical researcher working on whale issues, and Dr. Patrick Taylor, who's the science director for SIMRES. And they're going to host and present the questions to our panel. So over to you, Ruth and Patrick.
Okay, well, thanks. We actually had our first question come in yesterday, and the first question was from Adriana, and her question is there any evidence that transient orcas prey, for example, sea lions, seals, porpoises, can distinguish transient from resident orcas, and therefore confirming that they're aware of when their lives are in danger? And for this question, I'm going to direct it towards Susie to begin with, and then we'll open it up to other panelists who may wish to add to her answer.
Well, we observe this in real time at Boiling Reef. The sea lions, there are two different kinds, the Stellars and the California. And when the transients are nearby, you see them clambering up on the rocks. So yes, they are aware of it. The harbor seals also are trying to get up there, and Lucy mentioned that they try and hide in the sort of shallow waters where the transients tend not to go. So yes, they know. I think that they are careful when the southern residents come around, but it's a different experience. Now, this is just empirical observation. We don't have any hard data on that, but I can tell you it's quite a event when the transients come by and they're in their hunting mode. Anybody else?
Andrew, did you want to?
I'll speak up. So in terms of porpoise and dolphins, there's been lots of observations, including ones that we made this summer on camera, where we've got white-sided dolphins and Dall's porpoise essentially riding on the bow wave of resident killer whales. And given that they're at the biting end of the whale, they know exactly who they're with, and they would not be doing that with transients. I don't know what the signal is, if they know their calls or how they recognize them, but they can clearly tell the difference. In terms of seals and sea lions, what I've noticed has been when I have seen both residents go by and transients go by, hauled out seals and sea lions, there's a lot of nervousness. Animals become very agitated, but there seems to be, they're able to read whether or not there's an intent to kill, in which case the behavior changes very radically. But I don't think that they're as good about figuring it out at first until they see some behavioral change in the whales to know which type they're dealing with.
Okay, thank you. Just a reminder for people watching live that the question should be put into the question and answer window, and I can see that lots of you are doing that, not into the chat. Thank you. So a question from Ashley Carroll Brummel. This is directed to Andrew TRITES. What is your method for approaching the orcas to tag them? Are there restrictions on using drones in this area? For example, is it research only?
So first, in terms of using drones, there are restrictions. There are some places where one cannot fly drones due to air traffic. And also we have restrictions among researchers in terms of how many drones could be flown. And the rule is just one drone. And that requires coordination between the different groups that are using drones. As you heard in the talks today, and as you go and listen to more and more talks about marine mammals, drones are being used everywhere. And so far, I haven't heard of any bad incidences, but at the same time, I know that our permitting pays careful attention to that. And also there's always been concern whether or not drones affect the behavior of marine mammals. We haven't noticed that in terms of our use with the killer whales, but certainly with sea lions, for example, they can react if they're flown too low. In terms of putting on the tags, I showed in one of the pictures a very, very long pole, and the tag is on the end of that. And it requires good coordination between our tagger and the skiff driver. And fortunate for us, Chris Hall, who is driving the skiff, has got so many years of experience in and around killer whales. He's very good at anticipating where they will come up and their behaviors. And with him and Mike together, they were able to go in almost very delicately as the whale came up and go click. And it was just essentially pushing a suction cup down onto a mirror. It sticks on, and then the boat just pulls off slowly and the whale continues. What we notice in putting on the tags is that the whales often, they are sensitive to touch, and we often see a shudder, but we also see from the camera footage that there's no change in the behavior. A dive just continues on. It isn't though they turn direction or change something. So they are aware of our presence. They are aware they've been touched, but we don't see any behavioral reactions afterwards in terms of them being aware that they're carrying this tag.
Okay, we'll move on to the next question. Thank you, Andrew. A question for Sanjeev. Was the accuracy in identifying species based on a self-reporting survey participants completed, or are these results based on species ID testing? And can you estimate total unique individuals?
The unique IDs were verified by Lucy, and so yes, it's all based on photographs.
So have we covered that whole question? Self-reporting survey participants. Yeah. Yes. Okay, another question, this one about harbor porpoise. I'm not sure who to direct this to, but Norma, you have seen a lot of harbor porpoise, I'm quite sure, in your images there. So this question is about the drop-off in harbor porpoise sightings, and this person seems to think that that's probably pretty significant. They were not reported on the Citizen Science Project, at least on the graphs shown on some of the slides by Sanjeev. Is there intent to follow this trend? Or Norma, have you observed that similarly, that there's been a drop in harbor porpoise?
No, to be honest, I can't explain like why that is. It definitely caught my eye when I was looking at the data. So if anyone else in the panel has a kind of some theories behind that, we'll be very interested in hear them.
We've had trouble following harbor porpoises. I think anecdotally, we had noted that there were significantly fewer harbor porpoises this past year than previous years, just because those of us who live on the water see them all the time, and we didn't see them this year. The cause of that, I don't know. In terms of the Citizen Science Network following them, they're really hard to spot. There are two other organizations, though, that are tracking harbor porpoises along boundary paths. One is the BC Cetacean Sighting Network, and I think the other one is through UVic. So there is work being done on that. It's just that we aren't, but there is a noticeable drop for sure. Why, we don't know.
Well, sorry.
I was also going to say, I was also struck, Nora, when I saw that graph, that huge change. It's really big, and I guess my first suspect would be the transients. And look whether you got any sort of correlation in terms of their numbers or their behaviors. But that is a striking change, and particularly change in a year when the ocean, we think, has been quieter. You'd think that porpoise would be more frequent visitors, but I think it's something for you to watch carefully for this coming year.
I just thought I'd like to mention that we are going to do a SeaTalk this spring with Aaron Purdy, who is doing a research project on the harbor porpoise. There are a couple of groups in this area doing research on them, so hopefully we can get more data and an analysis of that from them.
Great. Okay. This question probably is you again, Andrew. It's about the striking underwater image you had of the skin conditions. Did you want to comment further on what might be going on there? What's happening?
Just give me 1 second on that one. Whoops. So we're also struck by those images, and particularly because the way we see the skin when the animal is sort of out of the water compared to underwater, it looks very different. And this individual, it was D26, it's a 10-year-old male. And it was more marked than others, but all the whales have some of this. So we sent some of these shots while we're in the field to Stephen Rafferty, who's a pathologist and specializes in marine mammals, among other things. And also with Marty Helene at the Vancouver Aquarium. And what they thought we were seeing was something they called, well, endema, spongiosis. And they did that based on dead killer whales that they've seen in the past. It's a skin condition that should resolve over time, but is thought to be associated with nutrition and poor health, or possibly change in the environment. So again, it's one of these things. And with the cameras, we saw a lot of things we didn't expect. This was one of them, but it also points out perhaps other aspects or ways we should be looking at animal health, such as trying to assess skin condition, something we haven't been really looking at. But from the underwater video, I can see that there's some marked differences between individuals in terms of their skin conditions.
So following up on that answer, Andrew, you showed some pretty striking images of it. Was it A100? Was there any indication of sort of some skin conditions that might be affecting that animal? I think you said that the drone images suggested that it was fairly healthy.
Yeah, so certainly in terms of our assessment from the drone and whatnot, our big concern was the hook that's caught in. We certainly know in sea lions that when they get a hook off of salmon gear, usually the flasher is stuck very close to the mouth, and that hook is down in the stomach and basically will probably spell death for the animal, or hooked into the throat and rips at it. In this case, we reported first a DFO to Paul COTTRELL. We let other researchers in the area know about it to watch it. We then were sending pictures back to Vancouver so they could do the measurements and try to figure it out, and then consulted with the vets who felt that this hook, so in Canada, the hooks we use are not stainless steel, which means they should rust. And second, they don't use barbed hooks. Although this isn't to say that the hook could not have come from Alaska, where they do use barbed hooks, and they also use steel hooks too. But I think this video is very powerful to point out to things that we don't even notice from our boats. But we did see underwater. Certainly there have been some killer whales found in the past, dead, and they've had hooks in their stomachs. So killer whales are taking fish off of gear. Fishermen may not be aware of it, or perhaps they pull it in. We don't know in this case, did the whale take the fish off of actively fished gear, or did it catch a fish that was hooked that had broken the gear? But you know, in some ways, I think A100 will become a poster child to point out another reason why perhaps gear should be pulled in when whales are present and feeding.
We have someone sending in a comment on this saying skin condition is significantly affected by water quality and pollution. This is David Osborne. Moby Doll is an example of the deleterious effect of such pollution in Vancouver Harbor at the time and skin problems. So that's, you know, another way to look at or to look into as well, another thing to look into. This is a question again for you, Norma. Maybe you've observed these blows and the sightings of breaths. Is there any indication you can infer behavior from the images that you're collecting? So what the marine mammals are doing?
From the infrared, maybe. Right now, I'm not analyzing the data directly, and what I get is very small snippets that show, you know, what we're seeing, if it's a fin, it's a blow, and then what kind of animal it is, or species. From the images, though, from the optical images, they're just like from the regular camera. That one, yes, I think we can, we need to look at them more closely. Right now, we're just trying to identify images with animals in them, and then try to then look them more closely to see what kind of behavior we can detect, if they're just traveling through or they're actually feeding, or from the infrared we'll see. I think it's still a bit early and we're just getting just the first data from it. But yeah, it's a good question though.
Okay, thanks.
Ruth, could I ask Norma a follow-up on that? And I'm just
Sure,
wondering,
yeah, of course.
how intensive is it to work up those data? Do you have like Google AI in your back pocket or is it a lot of manual time? And can you take that and put cameras elsewhere to do the same thing? Because it looks like a very powerful technique that would really add to the underwater acoustic data that's being recorded.
Yeah, with the infrared, yes, the actually Ural Hurt is doing the Herald, sorry, is using the same technology and software from Woods Hole at Sturgis Bay. So from the infrared, it was just now we're testing out how good it works on detecting killer whale blows, and so far it's working. I mean, hard to tell how much we're missing. That's what we're going to be comparing with the optical images to see how much we are missing from the infrared. The regular sort of camera systems, the photobots, it's replicable. The images, we had to go do it manually for the marine mammal detections. It was for us a trade-off of collecting video versus still images, because they do take a lot of space because they're high resolution. So that causes, there's the drawback that it's trickier to come up with the signal detections. It's like the acoustics, right? You need a continuous sort of set of data to detect those different signals and changes in the images. So for marine mammals, it's because they're so hard to see and they only show a little bit when they're in the surface, they're harder to see. So we had to manually go through thousands of images. We can do that though with boats. And we have a tool that it identify if there is a ball in the image and how many there are. It's not smart enough to tell us it's a sailboat from a motorboat, but I think it can, it's just we haven't got there yet. So if you're interested in boats and looking at, for example, our questions is being around how many are transmitting AIS versus not, and how much we're missing when we're looking at AIS data, that could be used. And the system is fairly cheap. It's less than $1,000 per photobot. And we have the software that goes with it already developed. So you can pull a lot more. I think it's a matter of finding a suitable location, and then we have them on power and internet, but they can be autonomous and run out of solar powers and sending the data. Well, satellite will be expensive, but having archive locally. But yeah, the technology on this sort of stuff is just going really booming. So I can see at one point be able to do that on marine mammals as well.
So David Hannay, question for you coming in. Given your simultaneous measurements of ship noise and marine mammal noise, have you detected any suppression of marine mammal sounds when ships are present? I think you got to turn your microphone on.
That would help. Yeah. So that's always a problem with detecting marine mammals in the presence of noise. What happens is that the presence, having vessels present, creates noise that masks your ability to detect sounds from animals. And this is a problem. This is really the problem we're trying to identify. What is the effect on communication between animals due to ship noise? So that it's difficult just to say that ship noise is reducing the number of calls, because the number of calls is probably being reduced because we're not detecting them. However, there have been many studies that have shown that animals change the frequencies of their calls when ship noise is present. A lot of the ship noise happens at lower frequencies, say below 1000 hertz. And killer whales especially have been shown to actually change their communication frequency upwards when ships are present to try to avoid the masking that can happen from that low frequency noise. So I guess the basic answer is that that's a difficult thing to do because of this masking problem, but you can look at things like this change in frequency effect. Some people have seen animals increase the amplitude of their calls when ship noise is present to try to overcome the masking problem. But yeah, that's a problem that's difficult for these reasons.
Thank you. I just want to mention that there's about 5 minutes left in the question period. So if you have questions, put them in the Q&A window. And Lucy, this question is probably best directed towards you. The focus with southern residents and other whales has largely been focused on large commercial vessel traffic. I wondered if you had any comments about small private boats in Boundary Pass.
Yeah, so I guess one of the things that I mentioned in my talk is that I saw a number of events where a boat would go, a small vessel that is, would go right over the top of a whale, or maybe it had just dived down. And like I said, that it looked like the boat was just going straight over very, very fast. They just never knew. So there's like a really high risk of that happening just because people don't, well, they're so hard to see, but like people might not also know that there are lots of whales in the area. I guess that's the other issue.
Were you seeing that in the interim sanctuary zone, or was that more out in the larger, I know you mentioned the RCMP boats and some others that are just whizzing through on their daily trips.
Yeah, there weren't that many overlaps with boats in the interim sanctuary zone in Wales, but there are a couple where maybe the whale will be coming around the corner and there'd be a boat coming around the other way, and we can see this happening, but you know, you can't yell out loud enough to tell them to stop. You're just like waving on the side of a cliff. But yeah, there was actually one shocking event where a small vessel must have been, like, they probably could have touched the killer whales. They were that close to some transients, and that was in the interim sanctuary zone. So yeah, there's definitely high risk of that kind of stuff happening.
Yes, there's a comment, roadkill in the chat window here. If we have any other questions there, Patrick, that are coming in?
Interject for a second on the
Sure.
Small boats in the sanctuary zone. Our tracking, we missed the slide, but taken over the summer, 65% of the boats that were in and around the sanctuary zones were not in compliance. So that is a big issue, and it's quite different. Most of those boats didn't have an AIS system. They were small recreational vessels. And that's a problem. And it's a problem for the government to try and, I think, better inform boaters, but also really try and enforce the rules.
Yeah, especially as East Point sticks out. And like Lucy suggested, you can come around that corner pretty fast.
Yeah, and it's very close in to the shore there, whereas later on it isn't. I mean, that is a continual problem and something that we hope the government will address this coming year.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there. And a huge thank you to all of the scientists and citizen and otherwise academic scientists that have contributed to today's session. It's been really a great session.